So just start by saying a little bit about your work and your background, so we just get a
Yep.
little bit of context.
So my background, I come out of the human capital, human resources world. Earlier in my career, I was a senior officer in both small companies and big companies. Had a consulting practice for about 20 years. Most of that time, with apart from 4 years, I have done three things. I do executive coaching, typically with CEOs, C-suite types. I do a lot of work with leadership and startup teams, and then I do some board advisory work. The 4 year exception was helping a client take a 3-person company to 300 people, and then moving on. So that's most of what I do.
Hmm.
I love my work. I should add, I feel like I'm just blessed to be able to do this stuff.
Oh, lovely. But so this whole topic about awe in business and leadership, is that new to you, or have you used that for a long time?
Not new per se, but um, for me, and I think we talked about this, I think of awe as one piece of um, keeping yourself healthy. And so, uh, the awe program that we went to was by accident, probably like you. I was signed up for another program and ended up, I was committed to come out. It's like, okay, what other program can I go to? But there is a model. I've done some training out of Case Western University, and the folks who there are informed by work by the guy by the name of Richard Boyatzis. So if you go back
Mhm.
to emotional intelligence, it was Boyatzis and Danny Goleman, those two.
Yeah.
And in their model for mitigating stress, they have kind of 4 components they focus on. And again, the thing I like about Case is it's more research based than other coaching programs. Um, and they have it's kind of a mantra of head, heart, spirit, and body. So head is maintaining an intellectual interests that revive you. So uh, sort of make sure you're constantly learning. That's one way for renewal. Another is body, which is sleeping right, eating right, exercise. A third is heart, which is spending time with loved ones or close colleagues. And the fourth is what they call spirit. And their avenue to spirit uh, is things like meditation, prayer, nature. So we know from some research that being out in what they call the spirit world uh, is a way to revive yourself, to replenish yourself. And awe to me fits within that. So I will have clients where particularly I think it's a good practice just in general as a prophylactic, as a preventative, but people who are really stressed, it's like, why don't you add, you know, going for a long walk in the park? Or I had a client who um, had the option of taking the ferry in New York back home or taking the subway. And I said, why don't you take the ferry and go out on the deck and see the beauty that is out there. And so that, for me, that's where awe fits in, which is, again, I think for some people, uh, prayer may be the right way to do it, or meditation. But for me and many people I know, it's really seeing that there's a bigger world out there than you. And to me, that's the way I think of awe.
Hmm. So in my experience, when I work with companies here in Denmark, and you're based in the United States,
Yep.
when I work one on one, it's it's quite natural and easy to present them to the concept of awe and use nature and meditation, but I find it more difficult when I have teams within an organization or the organization itself. So how, because embodied leadership and using the resources that we have in the body, it's becoming more and more common, but it's not that common here in Denmark in corporate world.
I don't think
How is
I don't
that in
think
the States?
I don't think it's common in the US either. I had a vetting conversation with a potential client on Friday, a venture capital firm, and the background was they have a principal who is looking to swap out their coach, and the coach that they had been using is somebody who was described as being touchy-feely. And so would fit into the category of touchy-feely. So I think it depends. There are, I'm from a coaching world. I was trained at a place called the Hudson Institute in Santa Barbara, which is I think fairly regarded as rigorous and buttoned down. There's a coaching institute in San Francisco called New Ventures, and New Ventures is the antidote for people who want to move away from button down. So they get into, how does your body feel? What's your chakra looking like? I was coached by somebody there who's quite good, but she took me to a thing called ugly dancing, which was basically a bunch of people dancing just kind of randomly. So I think it depends. I think the challenge in a group setting is that what's appropriate for one person may be really unhelpful or inappropriate for somebody else because they're not there. I mean, my son, when he was 8, decided he was going to be a vegetarian. And so, which I think is a great choice. I've been a vegetarian. I may be a vegetarian again. But to introduce that to a larger group where you may have some diehard carnivores, you're going to have a little bit of a slog. So I think that's where awe fits in, which is, I suspect most of the time it's probably better on an individual level than a group level. Depends where the group is. But I think here, again, San Francisco is, has a certain reputation, which is probably more progressive. Even here it would be a slog. But there would be people who would embrace it, I'm sure, but there would be people who would like, oh no, here we are again. So I think it depends.
Yeah. Do you have any, because when you do executive coaching with top leaders, do you have any examples of achieving to be more touchy-feely with a top manager of some kind, and then watching that person integrate some of these more softer issues within that organization?
I don't in terms of using awe, because the way I use awe, which for me is nature, that's the way I think of it, is much more limited. I do have, in my practice, it's a little unusual because I do a couple things that most coaches don't do. So I do, I actually do, real 360 interviews where I interview somebody. I don't use instruments. I shadow people for 2 or 3 days, which is extremely unusual in the coaching world in the US. And so I will see somebody in action, and then because I shadow people, my presence at the work site is not unusual. I've had people say, "Oh, the shadow's here today," so I get to see, I suspect, my client in their natural setting much more than many people will. I mean, I still, unless the client's remote, I still prefer to meet the person on site, on their work site, because you get to see them in context, as opposed to the way they choose to present themselves. My ex-husband, 25 years, was a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and the dirty little secret is when you show up in the therapist's office, you are probably a different person than if you are in the waiting room or out on the street, or certainly in your family structure or in your work structure. And so a lot of the time, because I'm familiar, I will see that. So, you see certain aspects, but it's hard to draw a straight line and say, okay, the fact that I said to them, why don't you get out of your big corporate building and go walk around outside for 20 minutes a day? It's hard to take that and say, okay, that experience, I can do a straight line to some other behavior. It's,
Yeah.
it helps to be able to quantify things if you can, but you can't quantify everything.
No,
You can
especially
qualify,
not.
you can qualify it. You can qualify
Yeah.
it. But you can't quantify it. But we know from the Boyatzis research at Case that in fact a practice of, again, head, heart, body, spirit actually appears to alleviate stress. And so I would say, and I suspect there's some fMRI studies of people being out in nature and having that type of context experience that alleviates certain things. So.
Mm. So when we talk about nature as that being your go-to place with awe, so when we look at the categories from Dacher Keltner and Jonathan Haidt, so I'm just
Yep.
gonna read the categories
Yep,
for
I'm looking at it right now.
yeah. So
Moral
we
beauty,
have
collective
moral
movement.
beauty,
Yep,
collective
Yep.
movement, nature,
Yeah.
music, visual design, spirituality, big ideas, and life and death. So I've been thinking, because in many places, like you say, it's not possible to take people from their desk and bring them out into nature because they're so busy. So have you experienced any bigger companies, or would you have any ideas to how can you bring nature to people inside, like an office building?
Yeah, well, if that, your list has a bunch of things, and I think nature is just one part of it. I think the part of it is, I think there are a lot of paths to awe. I think, watching your 8-year-old ride a bike for the first time could induce awe,
Mm.
a lot of excitement, a lot of feelings of powerful connection. Because to me, awe is in part cemented around a sense of something greater than yourself. That's how I think of awe. Whether it's a lightning bolt or, a beautiful sunset or whatever. So I think part of it is figuring out how that individual taps into awe, because a room of 10 may have 10 different paths to awe.
Mm.
Let me show you just an example. Let's share screen for a second. It happens to be what's called an Episcopalian church. Anglican would be the mother church, and it's got a series of, I don't know, maybe 35 stained glass windows, and he is my partner is a visual artist, so for him that may induce awe, but for somebody who doesn't have that sense of keen appreciation, it's like, oh, it's pretty windows, right? Now, I happen to think he's also a little bit of an architecture buff. I think the space itself is very awe-inducing. It's got a certain grandeur to it. But I think part of the challenge is, I don't think awe is one size fits all. I think it's many sizes fit many different ones. So So the question you ask is, how do you bring nature into the workplace? I don't know it's nature is necessarily the the appropriate solution for everybody. But I do think even getting out and about, I mean, I was just in New York City about a month ago, and there are little parklets everywhere, and you can actually walk out. I think there is something about kind of fresh air, unless you're in Pakistan or India today, uh, fresh air and doing that. So it's really figuring out what the lever is for somebody, what resonates, and then how do they access that on a regular basis. Um, so it could be a walk outside. It could be sound is on your roster. It could be listening to, a partner put me Evangelist piece from the original Blade Runner, which is this very kind of melodic, ethereal sort of piece of music. So I think it depends.
Mm.
Not one size fits all. Many sizes fit many.
So awe would be a difficult concept to bring into a whole organization because it's so individual.
Well, let me temper that though. Yeah, I think it depends. I think the concept of replenishment, which is how I use awe, or activating certain things in your brain and body is something that you could introduce, and then the ways to awe would be multiple.
Mm.
So, I mean, what popped in my head, Everett, is if I said to you, good nutrition involves uh, eating dark green vegetables and some protein. Well, there's a lot of different dark green vegetables. We had Swiss chard and pasta last night. Now we usually have something called collard greens. They taste a little different, right? But introducing the concept and then having people sample what works best.
Hmm. Have you at some point in your, because when we look at the first category on this list, the moral beauty, which is um, a person's way of inspiring others, like say Martin Luther King on his "I Have a Dream" speech.
Yep.
Have you experienced any leaders that have had that ability with the voice and with talking to actually bring a whole group of employees into some kind of awe state?
Pretty rare. I think it's very rare because I think where I have seen that is more in the uh, political or sports vein. I mean, I think of Barack Obama, who's a very gifted orator and has a conviction about vision. I was blessed. So it was funny. I was in Beijing recently, and there was a group of about, I don't know, maybe 100 people who were ahead of me in a group, and they were all about between 5'9" and 6'6", and I thought, oh, the Danish are here, which they were, by the way. They were a group of Danes. Um, but you have, again, this is going to be, I think, just very individualized. So I think of moral beauty in a context of individuals, not necessarily leaders, individuals taking a piece of conviction publicly. It's like, I happen to love my 22-year-old son, but him having a point of view about how to treat Palestinians, even though he's got Palestinian friends and Jewish friends who are very close to him. He's got being able to articulate that in a public setting, that to me is kind of moral beauty. So again, I don't think it has to be necessarily. I don't know if you followed the recent spate of presidential election in the U.S., but there are some leaders who feel that's appropriate and are comfortable doing that. In a charged environment, there are many people who think that's dangerous. I mean,
Mm.
dangerous,
Yeah.
dangerous. Like, Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of oh JP Morgan, extremely talented, successful guy, said, I'm not going to take a public stance because I don't think it's healthy. So, right.
When was the last time you had an experience?
Of awe. Uh, let's see. You know what pops in my head? I was just in uh, I think I can show you. So that's a picture of a residence. Actually, it was his personal residence by a guy by the name of Philip Johnson, and it's called the Glass House. It's kind of famous, and the awe really came from looking at that human structure. The picture you can see, that's his kitchen inside. It's a bedroom that you can't see because of the reflection. Of just seeing how kind of perfectly proportioned the place was, how just amazing it was. So it's like that. That to me is kind of awe-striking. So,
Yeah. So that's like the visual design awe.
yeah, visual design. It was I mean, I think I don't know the research behind what engenders awe, all of that stuff. I suspect it's a function of both mindset and a function of context, mindset and setting, that would be my guess. Um, and so I had just been to see my son, had a great visit with him up in Providence, which is not too far from Cape Cod,
Mhm.
and then was taking a train down to New York on business and pit stopped in this town called New Canaan, and uh, just to see this house, which I've read about for years. And so I was coming with a positive mindset, good experience, right? A beautiful autumn day in New England, just gorgeous, and not too cold, not too hot, and then seeing the stunning architecture in the setting. So that's like, oh wow, that's really pretty powerful.
Mm.
That's what comes to mind.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
I will confess, I live in San Francisco, and there are, I mean, you saw the picture of that church. That was pretty awe-inspiring. Now that church sits on a very high hill in San Francisco, and so this was Saturday, I think. Uh, and so you can look at the whole vistas around San Francisco. I don't know if you've been here, it's geographically a pretty stunning city for a lot of reasons. It's, it's if scenic vistas inspire awe for you, you're going to get juiced all the time because that's that's physically what it's it's hard not to see a gorgeous vista. I mean, so
Wow.
it's a gorgeous city. So
Do they I mean, of course, yes, San Francisco has a kind of reputation within companies, but do they also spend a lot of money on the architecture from the inside with this in mind, or is
really,
that something that
I,
you make?
I think it really depends. My hunch is probably less so than more so. Most. It's funny. my partner works at Apple Park, works at Apple, and you've heard about they have this thing called the spaceship. You can
Mm,
look it up. If you've ever seen an Apple product launch, they film it at the spaceship. So it's a big circular, and it is widely advertised. It's pretty amazing space. I've been there for a holiday party. My reaction is, oh, this is interesting. Now what? It was not. It was. I think most corporate space is balances the aesthetics with the fact that how many employees can you comfortably put in a
mm,
environment. So it is constrained. It's not
yeah.
unlike the glass house that I showed you that was only constrained by Philip Johnson's talents, uh, and probably he was internationally acclaimed architect. So my hunch is he was not financially constrained. It's very different than a corporation where it's like, look, we've got to house, you know, 5,000 employees, and how do we do that? And yes, we'd like it to be a nice workplace, but at the same time, there are limits around it.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
A lot of light and fresh air does a lot of good things. So
Yeah, yeah. Do you also do within your coaching business, do stress management, like when people are burned out?
not stress management per se, but again, the way I approach stress with a client who is experiencing stress is that uh, uh, encouraging them to act on that four quadrant we talked about. So, mind, body, heart, spirit, and engaging in a conversation about how are they going to uh, uh, have activities that touch those four things.
Because I've experienced since, I mean, I knew a little bit about awe before we came to Cape Cod
Yeah,
this summer,
yeah.
but I've been widening it a lot since I came home, and I do quite a bit of stress management
Mhm,
and being really specific to these clients about how important the state of awe is for their nervous system.
mhm,
So this about um, reaching a state where you have a lot of oxytocin. So it's not just enough to just do a breathing exercise because it will calm your nervous system down, but you won't get that release of oxytocin.
yeah,
And I've experienced when people really get what it is that I'm talking about, and people usually have some kind of vacation memory. It just it's like it reaches somewhere inside of them that I haven't been able to reach before.
mhm,
So talking about this concept, it's like a gateway into a place within them
mhm.
that I haven't been able to reach before, and it makes so much sense to them.
Yeah.
Sometimes they, because when I talk about it and they know what I'm talking about, but they haven't experienced for a long time. I've had people being really sad because their life is with young kids and a career, and they're not able to reach that state because they're so busy all the time.
Mm. Yeah, I think part of the work, your work, my work, is how do you take that and then make it actionable? Um, there's that whole world of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which really has been, I think, when it got introduced, I don't know, like 50 years ago, was transformative because to simply have cognition about something is interesting, but what really, in my mind, counts is putting it into your life in an actionable way. So again, I can talk to you about nutrition and green vegetables, but if you're not figuring out a way to have them in your diet somehow, it's it's just intellectually interesting, but there's no benefit. So for me, the interest, and I, professionally, I have just a strong bias to, uh, I'm a doer by nature, executor by nature, is if that's something you want to do, let's talk about how you're going to integrate it.
Mm.
So how are you going to, take a walk in the middle of the day if you're chronically stressed so that you can actually relax and see nature? Or how are you, it's how are you going to do that so that you build up that, let's call it awe muscle, so it becomes part of your existence. I mean,
Mm.
I don't know, it's an awe thing, but I've got a 20-pound terrier mutt here, someplace where, part of what we do is we take a 30-minute walk in the morning, and I don't have my phone out. I'm not, texting people. I'm not talking to people. It's just me and the dog walking around. Sometimes we have a conversation, but I'm just experiencing what it is to experience. So again, not big awe, but maybe small awe, because I notice stuff like, there's a couple roses that I pass. I make sure I, smell them, because in fact, there's that phrase, take time and smell the roses. So it's from a client perspective, how do you find how they can induce a regular sense of awe into their lives, and then how do they make it actionable? Because I think I was doing a workshop last week by the Gallup people, and I was in a coaching breakout session with somebody. Really busy, she's a really busy woman. She's got twins that are like 7, and she ended up, being emotionally touched and crying. And it's like, let's talk about how you might shift this in a way that's a little bit more manageable. She's got elder care parents that are struggling. So I think the important thing is not the concept is important. Equally important, I think, is how do you make it actionable? How do you see it?
Yeah.
Like green vegetables. Like what are you going to do?
And in my opinion, that's the biggest issue with, because there are so much stuff being done in corporations to try to change things, but it is people coming in, talking, and then leaving again, and just talking about we should do this and that. But the whole embodied approach with how to integrate is, at least in here, it's not that common yet. It's most like talking about theories on change and theories on this and that.
I don't think it's common most places. I think the call to action is one, using language that people can understand and embrace. Again, in San Francisco, when somebody says embodied action, it's like, oh, there we go. So so some language that can cover that. And then how do you institutionalize it? Let me give you an easy example. We there's good research. Daniel Kahneman has spoken to this. It's not his work; it's somebody else's work that he properly acknowledges that a good thing in business when you're doing a project is to do two things. One is, before you go into the project, do what he calls a pre-mortem. What could go wrong, right? Really simple step. And then after you've done it, you do classically a post-mortem, right? How'd we do? Well, there are some organizations that are pretty good about doing postmortems, which is a very helpful learning thing. Very few organizations do a pre-mortem, right? And so something as simple as, I mean, to me, that's as simple as you're going on a road trip and you look to see if your tires are properly aired. Do they have air in the tires, right? Do you have, gas in your tank? Something as simple as that. And yet you and I know people who, when they go on a road trip, don't look to see if there's gas in the tank or if their tires are fully inflated. So the trick is really the concept, and then how do you institutionalize it? How do you put it into practice so that it just becomes part of the fabric of existence. So, and that to me is the greater challenge. So you gotta figure out a way to make it part of the routine.
And like you said, use words that they understand, that they
Well, that
way.
they can embrace. I mean, you know, it's funny. My partner is a guy who grew up where, you know, basically uh, it was, you know, meat and probably frozen vegetables. You know, it was like grew up in a part of the country that's right. It's cold, and you know they don't do that stuff. And yet, when he had his 40th birthday, he did at a place called Greens, which is kind of famous, which is a big vegetarian place, right? It is vegetarian food that is incredibly appetizing, right? Now, when I grew up years ago, vegetarian food was basically brown gruel that was really not very attractive. So part of it is a marketing issue. How do you market it? And so he had his, you know, he had a big 40th birthday party with, I don't know, like 40 people or something. And food was spectacular. Nobody really noticed that it was vegetarian, right?
Yeah.
It's pleasant to the eye, pleasant to the taste, well done, all that stuff. And so if you have conviction that awe does a lot of good things to your body, which I believe it does, how do you package it and institutionalize it so it's just part of the deal? But it's challenging because again, the pre-mortem, post-mortem example, to me, that is the simplest thing ever. And yet when I work with clients and talk about it, they're like, oh, we never do that. It's like, well, let's figure out how to do that. Yeah, but they don't always do it, right? So it's how do you introduce, and then a little bit like the vegetarian revolution, how do you basically make it so appealing that people do it?
Yeah.
Right? Stay well. It was great to see you again.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome so much. Take care. Bye-bye.